just as our ancestors did so long ago. And may the promise of spring light your way through even the coldest of nights. Thank you for joining me on this cozy corner of history. And remember, if you enjoyed our time together tonight, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and share these stories with a friend. There are so many more fascinating tales to explore together. But for now, I'll bid you a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. As the brutal conditions of winter tightened their icy grip on medieval society, even the most privileged were not immune to the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty, primitive castles ill-equipped for the harshest months, royal households faced a formidable challenge in staving off the biting cold and keeping the court adequately provisioned. The logistics of maintaining a royal residence during winter were nothing short of staggering. Massive quantities of firewood needed to be stockpiled to fuel the roaring hearths that provided the only source of heat. The kitchen staff toiled ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables that would sustain the court through the long, lean months when fresh fare was scarce. Servitors scrambled to seal every crack and gap to keep out the insidious chill. But even the most diligent preparations often proved insufficient against winter's relentless assault. In one particularly chilling tale, a medieval queen is said to have tragically perished from exposure within her own palace walls. According to chroniclers, Queen Elizabeth of Hungary was found frozen in her bed one bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle that was meant to be her refuge. As grim fates like these demonstrate, the spectre of death cast its ominous pall over the medieval world in winter's dark depths. But even amidst such bleakness, the indomitable human spirit endured and found cause to rekindle hope. For much of the populace, that faint glimmer came in the form of the Feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration falling on December 26th. This day marked a brief respite from the unending drudgery and privation of peasant life, a rare sanctioned opportunity for revelry and indulgence. Central to the feast was the tradition of misrule, a ceremonial inversion of the normal social order. For this single day, a commoner would be appointed the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over the merriment and issue playful edicts to his betters. However fleeting, this act of Saturnalian license provided a vital pressure valve for the simmering tensions and resentments bred by the oppressive feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for one mirth-filled day, where all could partake as equals in the feasting, gaming, and carousing. The sense of community fostered by such celebrations was more than mere diversion. It was a critical survival mechanism. With winter's cruelty threatening to break both body and spirit, the bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during the Feast of Stephen and similar revelries helped sustain the populace through the leanest times. One chronicle from 1377 recounts the poignant tale of two peasant families, neighbours whose meagre winter stores had been exhausted long before spring's arrival. On the verge of perishing from hunger, they pooled the last of their tattered resources to share a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That gesture of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining ravages. Such acts of compassion formed the very marrow of medieval society in winter, when a helping hand extended to a frostbitten traveller or an extra log given to a shivering widow could spell the difference between life and death. The grim shared purpose of weathering winter's onslaught together shaped a culture of interdependence that defied the era's often ruthless stratification. But even the warmest expressions of conviviality and fellow feeling inevitably cooled as winter's unrelenting misery stretched on interminably. The Feast of Stephen was but a small flare of light and levity amidst the frozen darkness, a momentary reprieve before the bleak slog of January, February, and March. As stores dwindled, bellies hungered, and the cold crept past the most assiduously stoked hearth. The faint promise of distant spring seemed to fade into impossibility. And yet, year after arduous year, medieval society endured against all odds. Through unimaginable adversity and hardship, they clung to existence, upheld by the grit, fortitude and fellowship forged in winter's unsparing crucible. As the land lay dormant and the sun retreated, they somehow found within themselves the tenacity to carry on. One can only imagine the flood of profound relief and joy that greeted the first tentative signs of winter's passing. The slight softening of the frigid air, the incremental lengthening of daylight, the hopeful drip of icicles yielding to the sun's strengthening rays. After months of unremitting struggle, the sight of the season's initial lost battles against the forces of light and life must have seemed nothing short of miraculous. For the battle-weary tillers of the earth, no day was more welcome than Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year. Falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January, it heralded the ground's imminent thawing and reawakening. Though the deepest rigours of winter had yet to fully release their stranglehold, the ritual preparations of Plough Monday offered a tangible talisman of hope, an assurance of winter's inevitable loosening and spring's fecund return. One can picture a patchwork of furrowed fields slowly emerging from the receding snows and frosts. The newly harnessed draft teams leaning into the first tentative overturning of the frigid clods. With each sod upended to greet the strengthening sun, medieval man dealt another blow to winter's retreating sovereignty and proclaimed his dogged persistence in the face of nature's caprice. We in the modern world, with our central heat and electric blankets, our well-stocked larders and resilient infrastructure, can scarcely fathom the immense fortitude required to endure the unremitting brutality of a medieval winter. If the season's impositions seem daunting to us now, from the cozy remove of our temperature-controlled bubbles, how incomprehensible must true winter suffering be? And yet, when we grumble about the minor inconveniences of a delayed flight or a rain-snarled commute, perhaps we would do well to reflect on the unyielding misery experienced by our forebears during those interminable frozen months. What reserves of resilience and tenacity they were forced to draw upon, year after arduous year, simply to survive. Their ability to eke out moments of celebration and fellowship amid such unrelenting privation seems nearly superhuman to modern sensibilities. That they not only withstood winter's ravages, but managed to find slivers of light in the all-encompassing darkness is a testament to the indomitable spirit that slumbers within us all, waiting to be roused by hardship's clarion call. So the next time we feel our modern discontents starting to chafe, perhaps we would do well to cast our minds back to the icy plights of our predecessors. In remembrance of those who came before, let us embrace the opportunity to tap into our own dormant reserves of grit and forbearance. And as we nestle gratefully into our warm beds, let us spare a thought for all those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with the weapons of will, fellowship, and undying hope. As the new year dawned and Plough Monday festivities faded into memory, medieval life settled back into its familiar winter rhythm. Short, frigid days and long, frosty nights were the hallmarks of the season. The fortunate retreated to the meagre warmth of smoky hovels and draughty manors. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of the greatest winter hardships was the ever-present threat of sickness. In the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time, disease could spread like wildfire. The common cold was an uncommon misery, leaving sufferers red-nosed and bleary-eyed, but far more serious illnesses also stalked the populace. Influenza was a fearsome foe, striking down young and old alike with its telltale fever, chills, and aches. In an age without vaccines or effective treatments, flu outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 was particularly brutal, with a virulent strain of influenza raging across Europe. In Paris alone, over 10,000 souls perished. Pneumonia was another stealthy killer, preying on those weakened by hunger or other illnesses. The winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to run rampant. It was not unusual for multiple members of the same family to succumb, leaving orphaned children and shattered lives in its wake. Even royalty was not spared the ravages of winter sickness. In fact, disease often spread even more rapidly in castles and courts due to the constant flow of people in and out. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence along with their entourage. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife